Hello, everyone. I am James Hendrickson, and you are joining the first Versus webinar of a three-part webinar series focused on supply chain. We are happy to have you here for this webinar, and we'd love to have you interact with us during this roundtable discussion. So please use the QA function to ask questions during the discussion, and we will do our best to answer those questions at the end of the session. So today I'm joined by Capm Petersen and Chris Maydaniuk from NRI. And we're going to talk a lot about how the NRI team has come to use Versus and a little bit about how that experience has been for them during the day. So let's get started. So I'm James Hendrickson. I run the Versus enterprise business. That means we're going after the industrial space, supply chain as a specific portion of that. And a little bit about Versus. Versus has built a spatial computing platform that allows computing in three-dimensional space. So we start with a digital or spatial twin to get an understanding of that 3D space and the objects in that space, and then use advanced AI to route workers and robots and to manage in that space. And we've started in the supply chain, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So, Chris, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Can you introduce yourself a little bit and then talk a bit about NRI?
Hey, thanks, James. Chris Maydaniuk here. I'm the president of NRI. NRI, we're a third-party logistics company, which basically just means that we warehouse and distribute goods across North America for branded manufacturers. There's a small sample there in the slide deck. You can see we have about 250 branded manufacturer partners, and we operate across Canada.
Outstanding. U.S. and Canada, right?
Correct. Perfect.
All right, Capm, can you introduce yourself a little bit and then talk to us a little bit about Versus, what that journey has looked like for you and how we ended up in the supply chain?
Sure. Thanks, James. So my name is Capm Petersen. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer and one of the founding team. Just to talk about what Versus does and what Capm, our operating system, does. When I think about what we really do that's powerful is that we're normalizing data and we're adding a spatial context to it. It's really like, what is it and where is it? And you can do that really for anything in the world. And if you really kind of think about what is the economy, all the economy really is just moving things through space. That's all that's really happening in the world. Like that's all, if you really kind of want to get philosophical about it, that's all that's really happening in the universe. The problem is you got all these different siloed enterprise systems that they don't understand what the other one's doing. They don't know what the other parts are doing and where they are in space. And so if you can get that shared understanding, if you can get that shared context of the world, then you can really start to solve the world's biggest problems. And that's what we're really setting out to do. And because the data has been normalized, you can get AIs from third parties to be able to compete and try to solve these solutions. There's not currently a platform that does that today. All these AI platforms that are out there, they're generally they're siloed. They're just focusing on one little problem, one little data set that's normalized just for that. We're trying to standardize that across the board. And that's why we're working with the IEEE on developing the standards for the spatial web. And if you look back in history, you think about like, okay, when has this happened before? HTML was a great example of this. And then in the mid-90s, there was a big problem, if you guys remember, that you couldn't get the browsers to all work together. You had to have multiple websites for different browsers because there wasn't any standard for HTML. So they created the W3C to create that standard, and then $1 trillion was instantly created out of that, right? And so we're at that same kind of moment in history right now where we're having the same opportunity with AI to understand the world's problems. And to get started, Versus is really focused on autonomous systems like drones and autonomous vehicles, but we really got to start in logistics, and that's what we're going to talk about today.
So tell us about why logistics. I mean, that sounds amazing, but it's usually not the place that people start. So what caused you guys to focus on that?
It was, I'd like to say that it was planned, but really it was, I think it was more just fate and luck. So we were at the dawn of our company, and this is going back in conversation over many years, but we kind of set out about 4 or 5 years ago to really get focused on kind of smart city initiatives, which is a really kind of big, broad umbrella, and it's a little bit challenging to find an opportunity there and really focus on it. And a friend of mine works for NRI and was explaining to me how the problems of just they're just growing like crazy, and they don't know where things are in the warehouse, and they have a really hard time with retention of the workforce and turnover and everything. And so I came down to the warehouse and I looked at it and I said, this is a little city right here. You got addresses, you got boxes moving through things, you got hand trucks and forklifts moving around just like cars and everything. And so we realized we can, this is like kind of the perfect opportunity for us to take the same kind of principles that we would think about at a city scale and really apply them into the warehouse. And so we got together with Chris and the team, talked about our platform, and then that's what got the whole conversation started, which is probably a good time for Chris to talk about what it was like on his side of the table.
Wow. Hey, don't take over the moderator role here, Capm. Chris, tell us about your experience with that.
Yeah, I mean, when I first met Versus, they definitely really did a great job providing me with a pretty compelling vision for sort of the end goal, which is much further down the road and beyond the scope of logistics. But I definitely just connected with Capm and saw that shared opportunity to really use a warehouse as like a laboratory for these bigger visions and bigger opportunities. So, it really resonated for us as a pretty tech forward logistics company. We've been developing our own software for logistics for the last 25 years. So when we saw, the capabilities of the Versus team, even early on, going back a few years ago, and what they were able to put in front of me, they did a pretty quick prototype a few years back that just really sold me. They basically gave me a hands-free AR perspective for pick visualization, to know where to go to navigate within my DC, and that was a real big deal for us at the time. It was a game-changing opportunity. COVID obviously really disrupted supply chains, and technology investment has been pouring into our industry left, right, and center. But a company like NRI, we really need to be really agile and intelligent with our capital investments. And when we started looking at, the Versus opportunity, it was a real significant and intrinsic way to lean into software technology to drive huge exponential technology opportunities versus, traditional investment or more nuanced investment in robotics. So it was a real great, we didn't lose the flexibility of our business by having to pour a bunch of money into physical assets. And we really got to start tapping into some virtual value. It's really exciting.
That is exciting. So Chris, we've talked about this, and I think it's been quoted pretty publicly, that around improving the operational efficiency somewhere between 30 and 40%, and that being a game changer not only for you but also for the industry as a whole. So, what do you think that the experience of somebody that is outside of NRI, like the normal warehouse or 3PL that we encounter, what do you think their experience would be like? Is this unique to NRI?
No, certainly not unique of the value proposition. Again, I think there's far more NRIs out there than there are, global multinational 3PLs that are spending hundreds of millions of dollars in automation and robotics. So there's a much broader marketplace for this immediate technology that you guys have developed with Wayfinder. So I think it solves an immediate problem and creates immediate value, which we've started to realize across our entire network as we've rolled Wayfinder out in every single DC that NRI has, which is now actually pushing 20 DCs here.
Oh, that's amazing. So this question's probably for both of you. I think let's start with Capm, and we'll get sort of the perspective on both. So I know that the Versus team talks a lot about and focus a lot about on adoption. and building products and building solutions that scale for adoption. Capm, can you talk about the experience of rolling out that first implementation and how we were able to go from that to a larger adoption? What did that look like? What hiccups were there? And then how did they get resolved? And then, Chris, that same question is going to come to you. And I think, people, you can be real raw with people and let them know what went well and what didn't go well, and how those things were addressed. So, Capm.
Yeah. Warehouse pickers can be a tough bunch. They're busy. They don't like change. Obviously, nobody likes change, right? And so to go in and show them what we're doing, and get their feedback was really exciting. And that's, I remember some moments where they still kind of bring tingles to me, because when people saw what we're doing and they got in their hands, and it really helped them, it talked to them, it showed them where to go. The workflow was so much more easier. It just felt more natural to them to get that feedback and to see the smile on their face, and to see it really resonate with them. That was really exciting. And there's something that happens that's kind of unique about our application. When pickers in a warehouse, a lot of times it's like, we call it like checking out a library book. A lot of times you just get a kind of a skew of what you got to pick, and then you're going to get an address of where you got to go to. And so you got to figure out where in the warehouse to go to, and then find that thing. And so what you can do, you can see, here on the screen, it just routes you there, kind of like Waze. We call it Waze for picking. And so it frees up all this mental space. You don't have to hold that 3D model of the warehouse in your head, which also takes a lot of training. I mean, Chris, you can talk about, how long it takes to get to picking proficiency, but it takes a while just to get your head wrapped around where you got to go quickly and make a decision. Is it left? Is it right? Is it behind me? Is it in front of me? That's hard. And so to take all that mental capacity away from them, and so they can just be focused more on making sure they're doing the right job. And maybe think about, hey, what am I doing for dinner tonight, or this weekend? They don't have to be so focused all the time, which is really mentally fatiguing, draining. And so I think that really helps on the retention side as well. I know, Chris, that your pickers have enjoyed using it, and you've seen that that's really increased the pick time to proficiency.
Yeah, I think my additions would be to echo some of what Capm said. I think if you can convince an operator of a piece of technology, you're doing a really good job, because they're very busy people by and large, and if you're not demonstrating immediate value, they're not going to continue to. So the Versus team was very successful. They won our team over with real value for sure. And Capm said it well. Like, internally, we do refer to it as just the Waze for the warehouse. So it's super valuable from that standpoint. It's definitely improved our ability to get new folks up to speed faster for sure. I mean, post-COVID, retention rates and just turnover in general is at record highs relative to pre-COVID in the supply chain world. So we're constantly onboarding new people to be able to have the flexibility to move them between DCs and not have to have that location familiarity again, because it just takes that stress away, and they're just able to follow the guidance of the map is really critical. And honestly, it's that call to action for the user that's really valuable. It just keeps them on task, moving from one spot to the next. They don't have to think and take that mental fatigue on. And we've done benchmarks even against some robotics implementations, because we've done robotic implementations as well. And certainly in the e-fulfillment world, the Versus application, because it's driving that call to action, is actually quite on par with robotic implementations. And for NRI, it's a fraction of the cost.
Nice. So, Chris, I think that you brought it up. I'm glad you did, because I don't think anybody can do a webinar without talking about the impact of COVID. So what would this have been like with going through COVID and this press on supply chain that happened there with before you had Wayfinder? What would that have looked like? How would it have struggled? Or would it have been about the same, but you were able to do some things differently?
Maybe rephrase that one for me, James.
Yeah. So were you, you touched on it a little bit about how you were able to onboard people. They were able to move more quickly. That sounds like that's because they're having that guidance from Wayfinder. But could you talk about that a little bit more when you had those pressures from COVID? that were unexpected. How did Wayfinder help?
Yeah, I mean, it provides us just with more agility as an organization, right? I had the flexibility to be able to take, tenured staff from one location that had never operated in that other DC and be able to put them in there and just get them up to speed quicker because they didn't have that same sort of ingrained address knowledge that comes from warehouse management handheld systems.
So you're able
Chris,
to onboard people faster.
Yeah, I was going to say, in the time that we've been with you, you've opened up, I don't know, another 5 DCs or something. So, your time to getting those up and running is amazing from the time you sign the lease to opening up the doors and shipping product out. And so I imagine that, the ease of just knowing where everything is and getting people trained up is a real factor for that.
Yeah, I mean, we're spinning up and able to, pick within a DC, and sometimes sub 30 days is how aggressively we currently, just because you can throw up pick face so aggressively these days. But yeah, no, absolutely.
So let's talk about timing. A lot of the questions that have come in have been about the timing of this. So how long did it take to get the first implementation of Wayfinder? And then how did it go from that point forward? So Chris, I'll ask you, what did that journey to that first install look like? And then from that point, how did you go from there?
Well, Capm was the one in the warehouse on the ground. So he's better to speak to that first one, but I can tell you that once we got integrated, it's all via API integration. So at this point, it's like facility agnostic. We spin up a DC. There's, we provide a CAD drawing, and we're pretty much good to go. Let Capm provide some of the technical scope around that.
So when you're adding a separate facility, that comes online really fast, like with a CAD drawing. And do you even have to visit the site?
I do not.
If that's to me, no, you don't have to.
Wow.
We just need the CAD drawing, and then we're able to create the digital twin. And then we just have somebody there on the ground just can make sure to verify all the addresses, and we didn't miss anything, because sometimes the digital twin and the CAD aren't the same. But once you're through all that, and that process we got it down to about a week now of going through that process. And then once you got that, as like Chris said, it's just an API. So this is just like a thin client that sits in between the WMS and the pickers. And so it's a really light integration. It's as light as it possibly could be. We're not holding any additional information. We're not managing inventory or anything like that. It's really just tell me where to go and what to pick. So that part is really easy. So like Chris said, once we got the digital twin, you can just turn it on, and people are out there using it on the floor.
Outstanding. All right. So Chris, before I go to the next slide, what were you expecting going into the project? What was it like to work with VERS on the project versus other vendors? And then we're going to lead to what those results were. So feel free to talk about that. And then at just the right time, I'm going to reveal the next slide where we see those results.
Yeah, sure. I mean, like I commented on, I think we bought into the grand vision of VERS. So we partnered, we signed, a multi-year agreement with the aspirations of continued growth of the partnership. Certainly, we knew Wayfinder was basically, MVP for us and in the partnership to get us off the ground and start creating value. So that's been exciting, but we've always had a holistic partnership and vision in terms of what we still plan to achieve together, because ultimately our confidence in VERS was and remains their appreciation for treating the warehouse ultimately as a smart city ecosystem. And it's really the data management that really has us convinced on VERS in terms of strategic partner for the future and what they're going to be capable of doing with all our data to give us the best actionable insights and items they can throughout a warehouse. And the reason why Wayfinder was such a success for us and why it was critical that it came first is it actually gave us current state, the device going to interface the human to that data. So while we've addressed picking with Wayfinder, now we've got, dozens of other warehouse applications that are required in our quote unquote smart city. And that's how we'll be able to build off of that, with Wayfinder being, the starting point of that interface to the human. And obviously as technology keeps progressing, we'd like to see ourselves get to sort of that true hands-free, true vision perspective from the human standpoint. And then in terms of results, like I said, we're actually, we just opened up our 20th DC now, and, I think I've got over 1 million units to pick today. So, I mean, we're really scaling here now. So there's a lot going on, and it's just been really nice to know that in terms of scaling our picking requirements, we've got, a very future forward partner that's going to consistently bring value to us in that regard. Prior to Versus, NRI was just as part of our software suite, we were developing and maintaining, our own application. So I can tell you, as it was a really big deal for us to make a decision to say, hey, we're going to parse this piece of our software out and lean into a third party like Versus. It was a very big decision, and wasn't made lightly, but certainly we've remained very happy that we did make that decision. And as I alluded to, kind of where I want to see us go next together, and Cap and I continue to have these conversations, and we've got I know they've got some prototype work done for us at this point that Cap can comment on. But for us, it is about just really spatialization of the warehouse. So it's not about reports and about fancy graphs. It's about really driving task management at a human capital level. But a lot of that comes from having your inventory in the most efficient manner in your DC. So when product delivers from factory to a distribution center, the first time a human has to touch that product, you want them to, be touching it and moving it in the most intelligent way for outbound flow of that, future destined outbound requirement. And currently that's a very human driven, complex algorithm that we've got, a lot of ingrained management experience required in operations to be successful at. But supply chain is just getting increasingly complex. At NRI, we don't just ship direct to consumer orders. We're shipping wholesale, we're shipping Amazon, we're shipping replenishment, we're shipping vertical retail across the country. So you've got all these complex shipping requirements for each channel. And they're coming out of a single pooled inventory. So having Versus really leverage not just capacity planning and heat mapping, but really driving the most intelligent slotting for inbound deliveries of goods to put it in the most highly efficient place and predictive place from an outbound efficiency standpoint is going to really continue to be sort of the next step for us together. And we're really excited about it.
No, that's outstanding. So Chris, one of the questions that came in during the discussion has been about how the Versus technology can inform that layout of those future DCs that are going in, and I think that's some of the things that we're working on next. Do you want to talk about that, and then Capm, do you want to talk about some of the things that we're doing to expand on that? So, Chris, where are you today on using Versus to do that, and where do you think we're going to go?
Yeah, I mean, we're early days on using Versus tools for that. We've got sort of a demo site up with one of our larger clients that some data is being cranked through to showcase us not just heat map, but slot optimization and driving value. So they've got some key sort of business metrics in the model to intelligently give a profitable slotting reslot suggestion and move. So, Capm, maybe you want to comment a bit about it.
Yeah, sure.
So, hold on, before you do that, I want to make sure everybody who's not super familiar with supply chain knows why slot optimization is important. So, Chris.
I think I kind of covered that prior, but I mean, when product comes in your warehouse, it's destined to hopefully go out of your warehouse as a distribution center. So you want to make sure you're putting it in the most efficient manner possible and using predictive data and all those inputs to make sure that you're not spending more labor than you need to successfully get that inventory out of the facility when it's time to do so.
That means like fast movers or seasonal items, you don't want to be buried way back in the back of the warehouse. They are front and center and easy to pick because there's a lot of volume there.
Correct.
All right, Captain, tell us about what some of the things that the VERS team is working on along with NRI.
Yeah, well, so just on that problem, the efficiency of the warehouse, it's such an interesting problem because really when you think about it, like every single good in that warehouse has an optimal place for it to be, right? Like, like Chris is saying, it's like something comes in, it's gonna be high mover, put it in the highest mover location. So figuring out where that highest mover location is in the warehouse is an AI challenge in and of itself, right? Like, how do you know that is the best position to put it in? And then how are you going to be able to determine based on some sort of forecast what the future volume of that item is going to be? And so this is this great spot where these two different AIs really get to kind of match up to really optimize the warehouse. And I like to think about it, it's kind of like a race car engine. It's like a race car engine at a theoretical, it's like a theoretical maximum output, maximum kind of horsepower, if you tune it just right. And so a warehouse has a theoretical maximum output as well that it can do. And so you're constantly looking at, is the placement of the good in the most optimal place for it to be? And what is the cost in order to keep that optimized? And should or shouldn't you do that? Is there enough ROI to take the time to keep the warehouse, finely tuned like an engine? And so that's really what we're trying to do is give the tools to inventory managers and to the floor managers to really make sure that they've got the product in the right place and they got the right people on the floor in order to keep everything optimized at all times. And that's something that, Chris can talk about this in the logistics world. Those kind of products just don't exist. They seem like they're kind of elementary, but because most of those systems out there, they don't think about it from a spatial first position. They don't really have the kind of the viewpoint or the position to be able actually to make those kind of judgment calls on how to optimize the warehouse.
Yeah, definitely from a true spatial AI standpoint, it doesn't exist, and it certainly doesn't exist from a tasking standpoint. There's softwares out there that might do velocity slotting and whatnot and things like that, but it's far more complex than just velocity slotting. There's far more intricate variables that need to be considered in that, and you're still then providing only with an output that then human management or inventory planners need to go and leverage to actually execute on, where again, if you could drive it all through a spatial platform like the Wayfinder application, then you're really taking away all of that management burden and overhead in terms of spatially managing your inventory.
So speaking of space, the routing picture down here has some robotics on it. So Chris, tell us about if you've done anything with robotics and how that has worked with VERS today, and what you envision for that in the future.
Yeah, I mean, we've done some robotic implementations and continue to do so. We do see a sort of a commingled value proposition, certainly between the Wayfinder application and obviously the grander vision of what VERS is providing us in robotics. I think humans are still going to continue to be in the mid-market of warehousing, the most agile solution that you can have. You tend to get into fixed limits with automation and robotics now. There's certain robotic solutions that do have some scalability structures in place to provide, some options, but they still are less flexible than the human component. So us being able to leverage humans at high value through VERS is still a leading driver for us fundamentally. I don't see us putting our current robotics investments in all our DCs while I've got VERS in all our DCs. So, that bodes well for the VERS application. I'd love to see some of the robotic players in the space really partner up with VERS, frankly, because I think VERS is solving a lot of unique problems that would actually boost the value proposition of the robotics within the DC. So that would be something I'd love to see happen here in the future.
No, that's a great point. Capm, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, the part that what I call the holy grail that Chris and I have been talking about for a few years is this whole like orchestration management platform. And this is kind of getting into where I think, the real value that VERS can add in the future of any operation, there's only going to be one digital twin that's going to manage that operation, right? And everything is really going to look to it as like the guiding principle, like where am I, what can I do, who is everybody else in this warehouse or in this city or in this hospital, right? And so in taking cues, taking that orchestration from that digital twin. And so, that's where Chris is talking about, being able to work with some of the other robotics companies and everything. At some point in time, there's going to be an orchestration management system that's going to be able to help with that. And, Chris has talked about this. Robots are challenging because it's hard to intermix robots. You can't have like two different robot providers in the same, zone in a warehouse and everything, right? But in the future, you can imagine that would totally be a reality. Watching anything in sci-fi, there's different kind of robots that are operating all the time. And so helping them, again, this gets back to our original, vision statement, that helping robots and AI really understand, have a shared understanding of the world, have that shared context, allows for that to happen, allows for that interoperability and the orchestration of all kinds of tasks and everything. So that's the part, the holy grail that I get really excited about driving towards, and that we're moving into.
Yeah, and that's where the standards come into play, I think, right, Capm, that you have to have standards to drive that capability, and that's what's exciting about working with the IEEE, as you mentioned earlier. Exactly. So we are at the bottom of the hour. The great questions from the folks that have joined us, and we really appreciate that. I think for the most part, we've answered the majority of the questions that came in just during the normal context of our conversation. So that's great. If you feel like there's questions that you didn't get answered, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'd love to answer them or talk more about that. And we'd love to have you also attend the upcoming webinars. Again, this was a 3-part series. So we have our next webinar scheduled for September 15th. More information to come on that, and more information on how to register and sign up for it can be found on our webpage and following at Hello Versus across the social platforms. So I'd like to take the last 30 seconds or so to thank Capm and Chris for joining us. We really appreciate it. You guys have been great and really, really good insights into this space. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Take care.